Toby the Tram Engine. Toby is a tram engine. He is short and sturdy. He has cow catchers and side plates and doesn't look like a steam engine at all. Toby's line runs alongside roads and through fields and villages. He takes freight cars from farms and factories to the main line, and he is always cheerful to everyone he meets. He has a coach called Henrietta, who has seen better days. Toby is attached to Henrietta and always takes her with him. She might be useful one day, he says. Henrietta used to have 9 cars rattling along behind her, but now there are only 3 or 4 because the factories send their goods mostly by truck. The cars, buses and trucks often have accidents. Toby is always careful. He hasn't had an accident for years. But the buses are crowded and Henrietta is empty. I can't understand it, says Toby sadly. People come to see Toby, but they always laugh and stare. Isn't he quaint and old-fashioned, they say. They make Toby so cross. One day, a lady and a stout gentleman with a little girl and boy stood nearby. The gentleman looked important, but nice. He was, of course, the Topham Hatt, but Toby didn't know this yet. "Come on, grandfather," called the children. "Do look at this engine." "That's a tram engine, Stephen," said the stout gentleman. "Is it electric?" asked Bridget. "Whoosh!" hissed Toby crossly. "Shh, shh," said her brother. "You've offended him." "But trams are electric, aren't they?" asked Bridget. "They are mostly," said the stout gentleman, "but this is a steam tram. May we go in it, grandfather, please?" The conductor had begun to blow his whistle. "Stop!" shouted the stout gentleman. He raised his arm and they all scrambled into Henrietta. "Hip, hip, hooray!" chanted Henrietta as she rattled along behind. But Toby didn't sing. "Electric indeed," he snorted. He was proud of being a steam train. The stout gentleman and his family climbed out of the next station. "What's your name?" he asked. "Toby, sir," said the tram engine. "Thank you, Toby, for a very nice ride." "Thank you, sir," said Toby politely. He felt much better now. This gentleman, he thought, is a gentleman who knows how to speak to engines. The children came every day for 2 weeks. Sometimes they rode with the conductor, sometimes in empty cars. On the last day of all, the driver invited them into his cab. All were sorry when they had to go away. "Goodbye," said Bridget and Stephen, and they thanked Toby and his driver. "Peep, peep, peep," whistled Toby. "Come again soon." We will," called the children, and they waved until Toby was out of sight. The months passed. Toby had few cars and fewer passengers. "Our last day, Toby," said his driver one morning. "Manager says we must close tomorrow." That day, everyone wanted the chance of a last ride. Henrietta had more passengers than she could manage. They rode in the cars and crowded in the caboose. The conductor didn't have enough tickets to go round. As they travelled along, the passengers joked and sang. "Goodbye, Toby," said the passengers afterwards. "We are sorry your line is closing down." "So am I," said Toby. The last passenger left the station and Toby puffed slowly to his shed. "Nobody wants me," Toby thought, and went unhappily to sleep. Next morning the shed was flung open and old Toby woke with a start. His driver was waiting a piece of paper. "Wake up, Toby," he said, "and listen to this. The mail has just arrived and there's a letter for us from the stout gentleman. Maybe it's good news." Thomas breaks the rules. There's a line to a quarry at the end of Thomas's branch. It goes for some distance along the road. Thomas was always very careful there, in case anyone was coming. "Peep, peep, peep," he whistled. Then people got out of the way and he puffed slowly along with his freight cars rumbling behind him. Early one morning there was a policeman standing close to the line. Thomas liked policemen. He'd been a great friend of the officer who had just retired in the village. "Peep, peep, good morning," Thomas whistled. Thomas expected that the new officer would be friendly too. He was sorry to see that he didn't look friendly at all. The policeman was red in the face and very cross. "Disgraceful," he spluttered. "I didn't sleep a wink last night. It was so quiet." The policeman looked at Thomas. "And now engines come whistling suddenly behind me." "I'm sorry, sir," said Thomas. "I only said good morning." "Where's your cowcatcher?" he asked sharply. "But I don't catch cows, sir," said Thomas. "Don't be funny," he snapped. He looked at Thomas's wheels. "No side plates either," he muttered. "No way." And he wrote in his notebook. Then he said sternly, "Engines going on public roads must have their wheels covered and a cowcatcher in front. You haven't, so you are dangerous to the public." "Rubbish," said Thomas's driver. "We've been along here hundreds of times and never had an accident." "That makes it worse," the policeman answered. He wrote regular lawbreaker in his book. Thomas's driver climbed back into the cab and Thomas puffed away sadly. Sir Topham Hatt was having breakfast. He was eating toast and marmalade. His wife had just given him some coffee. The butler came in. "Excuse me, sir, you are wanted on the telephone." "Bother that telephone," said Sir Topham Hatt. "I'm sorry, my dear," he said to his wife. "Thomas is in trouble with the police and I must go at once." He gulped down his coffee and hurried out. At the station, Thomas's driver told Sir Topham Hatt what had happened. "Dangerous to the public indeed. We'll see about that," said Sir Topham Hatt. A policeman came onto the platform and Sir Topham Hatt spoke to him, but however much he argued with him, it was no good. "The law is the law," he said, "and we can't change it." Sir Topham Hatt felt exhausted. "I'm sorry," he said to Thomas's driver. "It's no use arguing with policemen. We will have to make those cowcatcher things for Thomas, I suppose." "Everyone will laugh, sir," said Thomas. "They'll say I look like a tram." Sir Topham Hatt stirred. Then he laughed. "Well done, Thomas. Why didn't I think of it before?" "We want a tram engine," he went on. "When I was on my holiday, I met a nice little engine called Toby. He hasn't had enough work to do and he needs a change. I'll write to his superintendent at once." A few days later, Toby arrived. "That's a good engine," said Sir Topham Hatt. "I see you've brought your coach, Henrietta." "You don't mind, do you, sir?" asked Toby. "The station master wanted to use her as a hen house, and that would never do." "No, indeed," said Sir Topham Hatt. "We couldn't allow that." Toby made the silly cars behave even better than Thomas did. At first Thomas was jealous, but he was so pleased when Toby rang his bell and frightened the policeman. They'd been firm friends ever since.